Try to smell it. A mixture of river silt, cheap ale, soot, and overcooked mutton. Imagine a city that has more than quadrupled in just 70 years, turning from a sleepy medieval hub into a thick, swollen concoction of bodies and ambitions. In 1530, there were only 50,000 souls in London. By today's standards, the population of a couple of bedroom communities. But by the beginning of the 17th century, something frightening had happened. By the 1600th year, the population had exceeded 200,000, and 5 years later, 225,000 inhabitants were already jostling on the same crooked streets. London wasn't just growing, it was pouring out like dough from a tub, leaving Paris behind and becoming the largest human gathering in Europe. It was the time of Elizabeth I. The old feudal orders were rotting and crumbling, and people from all over the country, abandoning their plows and meager plots, were drawn beyond the walls of the city. It seemed to everyone that there, outside the gate, the money was lying right in the gutters, but there was no place at all. The authorities, looking at this chaos, panicked and forwarded the construction of new houses. Stupid decision. The townspeople had to get out of it. Since it was impossible to build wide, they went up. The houses stretched to the sky, building 4 or even 5 floors that overhung the aisles so low that neighbors from the houses opposite could shake hands or slap each other without leaving the bedroom. The buildings clung to each other without the slightest gaps. Something was always dripping from the roofs, even on a sunny day. "Hey, Thomas, where are you putting that beam?" Some carpenter shouted, balancing on shaky scaffolding. "There's only room for a cat to crawl through," they answered him from below. "Nail your neighbor right to the wall, he won't notice." This construction frenzy erased the old map forever. Previously, the wind blew between the business city and the pompous political Westminster, and the fields where cows grazed were green. Now, under the pressure of this sweaty, shouting crowd, the void disappeared. Every piece of land, every patch where thistles used to grow, was built up with shops, flophouses, and warehouses. City blocks have closed in, turning disparate pieces into a single, densely packed metropolis. The ancient Roman walls, which were erected back in the 121st year of our era, have been working as a reliable shell for almost 1,000 years. They clearly said, "Here is the city, and there is mud and wolves." But by the year 1600, this stone corset simply burst. The city burst out like an overripe fruit. The former suburbs have become a new heart, and the old borders are just an annoying obstacle for carts. At the same time, the eastern part, the very East End, began to turn into an endless work pen. The hum of the first manufactories, the crowding, the screams of longshoremen, the harsh, evil character of the future industrial giant was forged there. Medieval London was disappearing. His familiar features were fading, turning into a maze of bricks and wood. The old ways did not survive where a throat could be cut for 1 square foot of land. But funnily enough, even such a crazy perestroika couldn't uproot the whole past. If you walk into the Tower Hill or Aldersgate area today, you may come across chipped pieces of stone sticking out of the ground among modern concrete. These are fragments of those very walls. They stand there, gray and indifferent, reminiscent of Roman Londinium, a tiny fortified village that once hid behind these stones before going crazy and swallowing up all the space around it. Someone threw a cigarette butt at the foot of the masonry, which is almost 2,000 years old. It's a common thing for this city. Rotten boards, soot, and great history have always gone hand in hand here. While the residential areas were swelling and climbing on top of each other, all this swarming mass needed a reliable wallet. In 1860, Thomas Gresham built the Royal Exchange, a massive stone building that was supposed to declare that London was no longer a backwater. Antwerp used to be in charge of everything, but when it began to lose ground, the British seized the chance with a death grip. The exchange did not look like a quiet temple of finance. It was a hubbub, crowding and perpetual dampness. Hundreds of people were jostling under the arches of the courtyard every day, and everyone was trying to shout over their neighbor. How much is wax from Muscovy today? Some merchant would shout, wiping his nose with a greasy sleeve. More than your life, Richard, came the reply. The ships are stuck in the ice again, carrying only 50 barrels. They traded everything. Right there, next to the bales of wool, they discussed the supply of strange grass from America, or heavy sables from distant and cold Russia. In 1583, Queen Elizabeth I received the Russian ambassadors in Richmond. It is said that the ladies of the court wrinkled their noses at the smell of Eufty and old fat, coming from the heavy fur coats of the guests. But the Queen herself smiled. She saw new markets in these bearded people. Money flowed into the city so thickly that the city's coffers began to swell faster than the royal treasury. London has become a huge magnet, sucking people out of Europe. The Flemings came, and the French, the Huguenots, followed them. They carried with them not only the fear of the Inquisition, but also the secrets of weaving the finest silk and assembling clockwork mechanisms. Looms rattled in the Spitalfields area. The city began to speak in a mixture of languages where the sound of a golden sovereign was clearer than any dictionary. Someone lost everything here, falling asleep in the gutter after a mug of ale. And someone in a week turned from a tramp into a respectable gentleman with a ring on his thumb. But the real explosion happened later. In the year 1600, when at Christmas the air smelled not only of snow, but also of burning from stoves, a group of businessmen gathered to sign a paper. Elizabeth was the first to put her seal on the charter granting the right of monopoly trade with India. This is how the East India Company was born. Now on that day, it seemed like just another gamble by a bunch of rich men in dusty doublets. No one suspected that this office would eventually acquire its own army and start turning countries around like a merchant turning an apple in the market. The rumble of the carts at the docks became unbearable. The year 1605 greeted the city with the smell of pepper and cloves, which overpowered even the stench of sewage. The spices were worth their weight in gold. A small bag of nutmeg could provide a family with a comfortable life for a year, unless, of course, it was taken away in a dark alley by the Thames. The company's ships sailed into the fog for many months, and many did not return, becoming fish food somewhere off the Cape of Good Hope. But those that moored at the walls of London brought so much wealth that the old warehouses were bursting at the seams. The rats have chewed through the cinnamon sacks again, the harbor warden swore, kicking the dead rodent. "I don't care about the rats," the skipper replied, spitting overboard. "Look at this silk. In Westminster, the lords would cut each other's throats for such a piece. London has finally ceased to be just a port." He became a knot in which threads from all over the world were tied, money from Asia, furs from the Arctic, tobacco from the colonies. All this was ground in the millstones of the city. The city began to dictate its own rules. Yesterday's shopkeepers were now deciding which ships would go into the ocean and which would rot at the shore. Dirty, noisy, littered with exotic garbage and flooded with cheap wine, London was turning into the capital of the world without realizing it. Old England was living out its last days, giving way to an empire that was being born right here. amid the cries of seagulls and the clink of coins on the Royal Exchange. While oriental spices and gold from overseas colonies were densely filling port warehouses, it was no longer enough for Londoners to simply fill their bellies and purses. The city wanted to see sights, and such that the blood ran cold or tears flowed in three streams. In 1945, the Globe Theater grew up on the south bank of the Thames, in the Southwark area, where the land always smelled of mud, cheap ale, and dogfights. It was a huge, rough-hewn wooden tub without a roof. She looked clumsy on the outside, but inside she was alive beyond the dreams of the prim lords of Westminster. "Hey you, put your hat with a feather away," some apprentice shouted, elbowing his neighbor. "I didn't pay my penny to admire the back of your head." "Shut up and watch the stage, kid," he snapped. "Shakespeare promised a ghost today and you're all about hats. You're all about..." There was no theatrical silence. 3,000 people squeezed into this ring, sweated, peeled sunflower seeds, and threw apple cores at the actors if they started mumbling or forgot the text. Under the open sky, ignoring the fine London rain, the crowd eagerly swallowed the words. Kings were dying on stage, and a meter from the stage, in the thick of the pit, a pickpocket deftly cut off the purse of a gawking merchant. It was not a temple of art in the modern sense. It was a noisy, smelly, and beautiful farce, where sublime poetry was mixed with swearing from a nearby pub. It was here, amidst the smell of unwashed bodies and rotten straw, that the old feudal orders finally crumbled to dust. The city realized that it couldn't only trade wool, but also create worlds. But while some were yelling at the Globe, others began to get tired of the eternal chaos and crowding. London at the beginning of the 17th century looked like a tangled skein of dirty wool, crooked alleys where two people could not separate without touching each other with dirty shoulders, and eternal darkness even at noon. The city needed air. In 1631, a real breakthrough occurred when Covent Garden Square began to be built on the site of the former monastery garden. It was a shock to the layman. Straight lines, stone arcades, a huge empty space that made an unaccustomed person dizzy. Architect Inigo Jones brought back ideas from Italy that seemed alien to the locals. Instead of the usual pile of rotten planks and protruding beams, there is strict symmetry and order.